The stars looked cold and distant through the windows of the Aurora Dawn. Marine Sergeant Jake Morrison stood at attention in the main docking bay, his rifle held steady across his chest. He had seen many alien species during his time in space, but today was different. Today, the Catharans were coming aboard. Captain Roy Henderson walked back and forth near the airlock door. His face showed worry lines that had not been there a week ago. The captain had read every report about the Catharans 3 times. Each report said the same thing. They were dangerous. They were unpredictable. They did not like other species touching them or coming too close to their young. "Remember, no sudden moves," Captain Henderson said to his crew for the 5th time. "Keep your distance. Let them lead all conversations. And whatever you do, do not go near their cubs." Dr. Lisa Grant stood near her medical scanner, ready to record everything. She had studied alien biology for 10 years, but the Catharans were a mystery. Very few humans had ever seen them up close. The ones who had described them as large cat people with golden eyes and sharp claws. They were warriors who lived by strict rules about honor and territory. Jake shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Behind him stood 6 more Marines, all looking nervous. Navigation Officer Pete Collins checked his datapad for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Engineer Maya Thompson made sure her tools were secured to her belt. Communications Officer Dan Wright tested his translation device again. "They are coming through the airlock now," announced the ship's computer in its calm voice. The heavy metal door hissed open with a sound like steam escaping. Through the opening came shapes that made the humans step back without thinking. The Catharans were bigger than the reports had said. Much bigger. Commander Zethkar entered first. He stood 7 feet tall with broad shoulders covered in dark fur marked with silver stripes. His golden eyes looked around the room, taking in every detail. His hands rested near weapons that looked both beautiful and deadly. Behind him came 12 younger Catharans. These were the Cadets, students from their military academy. Each cadet stood at least 6 feet tall, even though they were still growing. Their fur came in different colors, some golden like sunrise, others dark like night sky, and a few with white patches that looked like snow. All of them had the same golden eyes that seemed to see everything at once. The humans held their breath. The Catharans moved with the smooth grace of hunters. Every step was silent. Every movement had purpose. They formed a perfect line behind their commander without anyone giving orders. "Welcome aboard the Aurora Dawn," Captain Henderson said in his most formal voice. He did not move forward to shake hands like he would with human visitors. The reports had been very clear about that. Catharans did not shake hands. Commander Zethkar tilted his head slightly. This was how Catharans showed respect according to the cultural files. "We thank you for allowing us on your vessel," he said. His voice was deep and rumbled like distant thunder. "These cadets will observe your customs and learn about human ways." Dr. Grant watched the young Catharans with scientific interest. They stood perfectly still, but she could see their eyes moving constantly. They were taking in every sight, every sound, every smell. Their ears, which looked like a mix between human and cat ears, turned toward different sounds around the room. One of the cadets was much smaller than the others. This one looked like he might be the youngest of the group. His fur was bright gold with white patches on his chest and paws. His eyes were wide with curiosity as he looked at the human equipment and uniforms. "These are learning cadets from our military academy," Commander Zethkar explained. "They study other species to understand the galaxy better. But they are still young. They follow strict rules." Jake noticed how the other alien visitors who had come to observe the meeting stayed far away from the Catharans. Representatives from the Zelani Federation stood near the far wall. The Crystalline Collective delegates had positioned themselves behind a cargo container. Even the usually brave Andorian diplomats kept their distance. "The Catharans are not like other species," one of the Zelani had whispered to Captain Henderson earlier. "They are territorial. They are protective of their young. One wrong move and they might attack." But as Jake watched the cadets, he did not see scary warriors. He saw young people who were far from home, trying to learn about a new culture. They looked nervous too, just like the humans did. Their ears kept turning toward every sound. Their eyes darted around the room as if they were making mental maps of everything. "We will show you our ship," Captain Henderson said carefully. "Our crew will explain how humans live and work in space." The tour began slowly. The humans led the way through the corridors of the Aurora Dawn. The Catharans followed in their perfect formation. No one spoke unless they had to. Every footstep echoed in the quiet hallways. Jake walked at the back of the group, keeping watch like a good Marine should. He noticed that the smallest cadet kept looking around with obvious wonder. This young Keitharan seemed more interested in the human technology than in following military protocol. As they moved through the ship, Jake could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was being so careful, so formal. The humans were afraid of making mistakes. The Keitharans were following their strict rules. But underneath all the worry and protocol, Jake sensed something else. Both groups were curious about each other. Both groups wanted to learn. The question was whether they would get the chance to find out what they had in common, or if fear and rules would keep them apart forever. The tour continued through the ship's main corridors. Captain Henderson pointed out different rooms and explained how humans lived in space. The Keitharans listened politely but said very little. Their golden eyes took in everything while their faces showed no emotion. "This is our dining hall," the captain said as they passed a large room with tables and chairs. "All crew members eat together here." Commander Zethkar nodded slightly. "Keitharans also eat as a group. This builds unity." Dr. Grant made notes on her data pad. These were the first details about Keitharan culture that any human had learned. Every small piece of information was valuable. The group moved on to the medical bay, the engineering section, and the bridge. At each stop, the humans explained their equipment and methods. The Keitharans asked a few careful questions but kept their distance from everything. Jake noticed that the youngest cadet was having trouble staying in formation. The small Keitharan kept turning his head to look at things that caught his interest. Commander Zethkar had to make small warning sounds twice to keep the young one in line. "Now we will visit the hydroponics bay," Captain Henderson announced. "This is where we grow plants from Earth." The hydroponics bay was one of the most beautiful areas on the ship. Rows of green plants grew under artificial sunlight that felt warm and bright. The air smelled fresh and clean like a garden after rain. Water bubbled quietly through growing tubes. Flowers bloomed in colors that painted the room with natural beauty. The Keitharans stopped at the entrance. Their ears stood up straight and their noses lifted slightly. For the first time since boarding the ship, they looked truly interested. "These are plants from your home world?" Commander Zethkar asked. "Yes," Dr. Grant said with pride in her voice. "We brought seeds from Earth so we could have fresh food and clean air during long space voyages. We have vegetables, fruits, herbs, and flowers." She led them down the rows of growing plants. "Here we have tomatoes, lettuce, beans, and carrots. Over there are apple trees and berry bushes. This section has herbs for cooking and medicine." The Keitharans moved closer to the plants than they had moved to anything else on the ship. They breathed deeply, taking in the scents. Their ears turned toward the sound of water and the rustle of leaves. "The smells remind us of home," one of the cadets said quietly. It was the first time any of them had spoken without being asked a direct question. Dr. Grant smiled. "Plants have a way of making any place feel more like home." Jake knelt down near a control panel to check a sensor that had been acting up lately. The hydroponics bay needed careful monitoring to keep all the plants healthy. As he worked with his tools, he could hear the Keitharans moving around behind him, their voices getting a little more relaxed as they talked about the different plants. Dr. Grant was explaining about a patch of herbs when she stopped in the middle of her sentence. "Oh," she said in a surprised voice. "I forgot we had planted this." Jake looked up from his work to see what had caught her attention. In a small corner section, a familiar plant grew with small purple flowers and green leaves that had a special scent. "Catnip," Dr. Grant said with a small laugh. "I planted it as an experiment months ago. I wanted to see how Earth plants would grow in space conditions." The moment she said the word, every Keitharan in the room went very still. Their ears turned toward the plant like radar dishes. Their noses lifted higher and their eyes got wider. The youngest cadet, the small golden one with white patches, took a step forward. Then another. His golden eyes were fixed on the catnip plant like it was the most interesting thing in the universe. "Piptar," Commander Zethkar said in a warning voice. "Stay in formation." But Piptar was not listening to his commander anymore. The scent of the catnip seemed to pull him forward like an invisible rope. He took another step, then another, moving closer to where Jake was still kneeling by the control panel. "Cadet," Commander Zethkar said more firmly. Jake continued working on the sensor, not wanting to interfere with Keitharan discipline. But he could hear movement behind him. Soft footsteps were getting closer. Without warning, something landed on Jake's back. Small claws gripped his uniform as a lightweight body scrambled up toward his shoulder. In one smooth motion, the young Kithran cadet had broken ranks and climbed onto the human marine. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Every other Kithran cadet jumped backward as if an alarm had sounded. They dropped into fighting positions that they had practiced 1,000 times. Their hands moved toward their weapons. Their golden eyes went wide with shock and something that looked like fear. Commander Zethkar's hand shot to the handle of his weapon. His face showed pure disbelief. In Kithran culture, touching someone without permission was a serious insult. Touching a cub was even worse. What the human might do to Piptar could start a war. The alien visitors from other species who had been watching the tour scrambled to get further away. The Zelani representatives backed against the far wall. The Crystalline Collective delegates moved behind the largest plants they could find. Even Captain Henderson tensed up, knowing that this could destroy all hopes for peace between humans and Kithrans. On Jake's shoulder, Piptar settled into place like he belonged there. A deep rumbling sound started in his chest and throat. He was purring. The young Kithran was purring louder than the ship's engines. Everyone in the room held their breath. They waited for Jake to react with anger or fear. They expected him to grab the cub and throw him off. They thought he might shout or reach for his weapon. Instead, Jake slowly turned his head to look at the young Kithran perched on his shoulder. Piptar's golden eyes looked back at him with curiosity and complete trust. Jake's face broke into a warm, genuine smile. "Well, hello there, little guy," Jake said in the gentlest voice anyone had ever heard him use. The words hung in the air like magic. No one moved. No one breathed. The moment felt like the entire galaxy had stopped spinning. Piptar reached out with one small paw and touched Jake's cheek. The purring got even louder. Then the young Kithran did something that made everyone gasp. He started grooming Jake's hair with tiny, careful claws, the way cats groom each other to show affection and trust. Piptar continued grooming Jake's hair with the concentration of someone performing a sacred ritual. His small claws moved carefully through the short brown strands while his purring filled the quiet room like a motor running smoothly. The young Kithran seemed completely at peace, as if sitting on a human shoulder was the most natural thing in the galaxy. Jake went back to work on the sensor panel as if nothing unusual had happened. He moved slowly and carefully, making sure not to disturb his new passenger. Occasionally, he reached up to scratch gently behind Piptar's ears, which made the purring get even louder. The other Kithrans remained frozen in their defensive positions. Their golden eyes darted between Jake and their commander, waiting for orders that did not come. Commander Zethkar stood like a statue, his hand still near his weapon but his face showing confusion instead of anger. Dr. Grant was the first to break the silence. She spoke in a quiet voice as if talking too loudly might break the magical moment. "In human culture," she explained to the stunned aliens, "we have a long history with creatures similar to Kithrans. We call them cats. For thousands of years, cats have lived with humans as companions and friends. When a cat sits on a human and purrs, it means trust and affection." She gestured carefully toward Jake and Piptar. "What your cadet is doing would be considered an honor among humans. He is showing that he feels safe and comfortable." Commander Zethkar's hand moved away from his weapon. His voice was filled with wonder when he spoke. "Among our people, a cub will only approach an adult they trust completely. Piptar has never done this with anyone outside our family groups." Captain Henderson let out a breath he had been holding. "So this is not an insult to your culture?" "No," the Catharan commander said slowly. "It is the highest compliment a cub can give. But it has never happened with an alien species before. Never in our history." The tension in the room began to fade like morning mist. The other Kitharan cadets slowly stood up from their fighting positions. Their ears turned forward with curiosity instead of back with alarm. One by one, they took small steps closer to see what was happening. Piptar finished grooming Jake's hair and settled down more comfortably on the broad shoulder. He wrapped his tail around Jake's arm like a furry seatbelt and looked around the room with bright, interested eyes. "How do you feel about this, Sergeant Morrison?" Captain Henderson asked. Jake looked up from his work with a smile that reached his eyes. "Reminds me of my cat back home, sir. Mittens used to sit on my shoulder just like this when I was working in the garage." The simple, honest answer seemed to break through the last barriers of fear and uncertainty. One of the Catharan cadets, a female with silver-striped fur, took another step forward. "You had a companion creature?" she asked Jake directly. "Yes. Cats are common pets on Earth. They live with human families and provide friendship and comfort." Jake reached up to gently pet Piptar's head. "They also help control pest populations and serve as emotional support for humans who are lonely or stressed." The silver-striped cadet looked amazed. "On our world, we have similar relationships with creatures called Vashti. They are small and furry and provide comfort to cubs and elderly Kitharans." Dr. Grant made rapid notes on her datapad. This was exactly the kind of cultural information that could build bridges between species. Navigation Officer Pete Collins stepped forward cautiously. "Would it be appropriate for me to approach?" Commander Zethkar considered the question seriously. "If Piptar remains calm, it should be safe, but move slowly." Pete walked over to where Jake was working. Piptar watched him approach with curious golden eyes but showed no fear. When Pete knelt down next to them, the young Kitharan reached out and touched the human's uniform with one small paw. "Fascinating," Pete said softly. "The fur is incredibly soft." More Kitharan cadets began moving closer. Their rigid formation dissolved as natural curiosity took over. They surrounded Jake, Pete, and Piptar with the eager interest of young people everywhere. Engineer Maya Thompson joined the group and found herself answering questions about human tools and technology. The cadets were particularly interested in her multi-purpose scanner and the way humans designed equipment to serve multiple functions. "Humans are innovative because we have to be," Maya explained. "Earth has many different environments and challenges. We learned to make tools that could work in various situations." A cadet with dark fur and bright gold eyes examined Maya's scanner closely. "Kitharans prefer specialized tools that do one thing perfectly, but your approach has advantages for space travel." Communications Officer Dan Wright discovered that several cadets spoke some human languages. With the help of his translation device and their natural intelligence, communication became easier and more natural. Dr. Grant found herself in deep conversation with Commander Zethkar about the similarities between human and Kitharan biology. Both species were adaptable omnivores who had evolved social structures based on family groups and cooperation. "Your reaction to Piptar's behavior tells us much about humans," the commander said. "Most species would have shown fear or aggression, but your sergeant responded with nurturing behavior." "Humans are naturally social," Dr. Grant explained. "We form emotional bonds easily, even with other species. It is one of our defining characteristics." The alien observers from other species watched in amazement from their safe distances. The Zilani representatives whispered among themselves about how they had misjudged both humans and Kitharans. The crystalline collective delegates recorded everything with their energy sensors. As the conversation continued, Piptar began showing Jake around the hydroponics bay from his perch on the human's shoulder. The young Kitharan pointed at different plants with his small paws and made soft chittering sounds that seemed to be questions. Jake found himself giving a tour to his passenger, explaining what each plant was and how it grew. "Those are tomatoes. Humans eat them in many different ways. And those tall green plants are corn. We grind the seeds to make flour for bread." Piptar's ears perked up at the mention of food. He made a questioning sound and patted Jake's cheek. "Are you hungry, little guy?" Jake asked with a chuckle. Commander Zethkar approached carefully. "Piptar has not eaten since this morning. He was too nervous about meeting aliens. We have some fruits that should be safe for Kitharan digestion," Dr. Grant offered. "According to my scans, your biology is compatible with most Earth plants." Jake reached up and lifted Piptar down from his shoulder, holding the young Kitharan like a human child. Piptar did not struggle or show any fear. Instead, he leaned against Jake's chest and continued purring. The sight of a human marine gently holding a Kitharan cub while the young alien showed complete trust was something no one in the room would ever forget. It was a moment that would change the relationship between their species forever. Captain Henderson smiled as he watched his crew and the Kitharan cadets sharing information and building friendships. I think this cultural exchange is going to work out better than anyone expected. News of the incident in the hydroponics bay spread through the ship faster than light-speed communications. Within hours, every crew member on the Aurora Dawn had heard about the Kytherin cub who climbed onto a human's shoulder, and the Marine who responded, with kindness instead of fear. The story reached the Galactic Council by the next day. Politicians and diplomats who had spent years trying to understand the mysterious Kytherins suddenly had their first real breakthrough. Ambassador Chen from the Galactic Diplomatic Corps sent an urgent message to Captain Henderson requesting full reports and video recordings of all interactions, but the most surprising response came from the Kytherin homeworld itself. When Commander Zethkar sent his daily report to the military academy, the response was immediate and unprecedented. The Kytherin High Command requested that the cultural exchange be extended from 1 week to 3 months. 3 months, Captain Henderson repeated when he received the official communication. They have never allowed their cadets to stay away from home for more than a few days. Dr. Grant was reviewing her medical scans of the Kytherin cadets when she heard the news. This is remarkable. According to my research, Kytherins are extremely protective of their young. For them to approve extended contact means they trust us completely. In the recreation room, Jake sat with Piptar on his lap, teaching the young Kytherin how to play a simple human card game. The cub had become his constant companion, following him everywhere and sleeping curled up on a blanket next to Jake's bunk. Other crew members had grown used to seeing the unlikely pair together throughout the ship. The cards represent numbers and colors, Jake explained patiently. You try to match them in groups. Like this. Piptar studied the cards with intense concentration. His small paws were surprisingly good at holding and moving the thin pieces of plastic. When he successfully made a match, he chirped with pleasure, and his tail swished back and forth. The other Kytherin cadets had also become more relaxed around the humans. They asked questions about everything from human food to the way the ship's engines worked. Their strict military formation had been replaced by natural curiosity and growing friendships. Maya Thompson found herself working closely with a cadet named Kreshitar, whose dark fur and bright golden eyes reminded her of a panther. The young Kytherin had a natural talent for engineering and could understand human technology with amazing speed. Your power distribution system is very efficient, Kreshitar observed as they worked together in the engine room. But have you considered using crystalline conductors instead of metal ones? They would be more stable in space. Maya looked at the equations Kreshitar had written on her datapad. These calculations are incredible. Where did you learn about crystalline technology? All Kytherin ships use crystal-based systems. We learned the technique from the Crystalline Collective many years ago, but we improved it with our own innovations. Pete Collins was amazed to discover that several cadets were natural navigators who could calculate space routes in their heads faster than most computers. Their three-dimensional thinking and ability to track multiple moving objects made them excellent at plotting courses through asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies. Your people have incredible spatial intelligence, Pete told Vextar, a cadet with silver and white fur who had just solved a navigation problem that would have taken Pete's computer 10 minutes to calculate. Kytherins are hunters by nature, Vextar explained. We must track many things at once and predict where they will be. This skill helps us survive, but it also helps us travel between stars. Dan Wright made perhaps the most important discovery of all. The Kytherin language contained concepts that no human language had, but when translated properly, these concepts solved communication problems that had puzzled diplomats for years. The word Kethmore has no human equivalent, Dan explained to Dr. Grant and Captain Henderson. It means something like the trust that grows when two strangers choose to be vulnerable together. It is the foundation of all Kytherin relationships. That explains so much about their culture, Dr. Grant said with excitement. They are not naturally aggressive. They are cautious because trust is sacred to them. Once trust is established, they become incredibly loyal. The breakthrough in understanding went both ways. Commander Zethkar learned that human concepts like empathy and compassion were not signs of weakness, as Kytherin culture had assumed, but were actually sources of strength that helped humans adapt to new situations and form alliances with other species. Humans feel the emotions of others as if they were their own. Commander Zethkar reported to his superiors. This allows them to understand what others need and respond appropriately. It is a survival skill that makes them excellent diplomats and allies. The cultural exchange began producing practical benefits as well. The Catharans shared their advanced defensive technologies, including energy shields that were stronger and more efficient than anything humans had developed. In return, humans shared their agricultural techniques and medical knowledge. Dr. Grant worked with Catharan healers to develop new medicines that worked for both species. The combination of human innovation and Catharan precision created treatments that were more effective than either species could have developed alone. The joint research is exceeding all our expectations, Dr. Grant told Captain Henderson during their weekly meeting. We are learning more about interspecies medicine in 3 months than we learned in the previous 10 years. The success of the Aurora Dawn exchange program caught the attention of other species in the Galactic Council. Representatives from the Andorian Empire, the Tellurian Republic, and even the usually isolationist Sigma Draconis Confederation requested permission to observe the human-Catharan interactions, but perhaps the most meaningful change was in the attitudes of the crew members themselves. Humans who had been nervous about meeting aliens now worked side by side with their Catharan colleagues as if they had known each other for years. The cadets who had arrived as disciplined soldiers were now laughing, playing games, and forming friendships that would last their entire lives. Jake often found himself surrounded by young Catharans who wanted to hear stories about Earth and human culture. Piptar remained his closest companion, but other cadets also sought out his company and advice. Why do humans form bonds so easily? Asked Laura Tar, a female cadet with golden fur and white stripes. Jake thought about the question while he scratched behind Piptar's ears. I think it is because humans learned long ago that we are stronger together than apart. Our planet has many dangers, and we survived by cooperating with each other and even with other species. Like your cats, Piptar added in his growing English vocabulary. Exactly like our cats. Jake agreed with a smile. Humans and cats helped each other survive and became friends in the process. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement from Captain Henderson over the ship's communication system. All crew members and cadets, please report to the main assembly hall. We have received an important message from the Galactic Council that affects everyone aboard this ship. As they made their way to the assembly hall, Jake carried Piptar on his shoulder, while the other cadets walked alongside their human friends. The sight that would have caused panic 3 months ago now seemed perfectly natural. Whatever news awaited them, they would face it together, as allies and friends who had learned that the differences between species were far less important than the things they had in common. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood in the Great Assembly Hall of Galactic Council Station, wearing the formal blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. On his shoulder sat Piptar, now wearing a small uniform that marked him as an official cultural attaché. The young Catharan had grown taller and stronger, but he still preferred his favorite perch on Jake's shoulder when important meetings took place. The circular chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of species throughout the galaxy. Beings of every shape and size sat in sections arranged around the central speaking platform. The air hummed with the sound of translation devices working in hundreds of languages. At the center of it all, the Galactic Council's 5 senior members sat behind a curved desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of star crystal. Their leader, Chancellor Vorth of the Centauri Alliance, stood to address the assembly. 6 months ago, we witnessed something that many thought impossible, the Chancellor announced. The human species and the Catharan Empire, both considered unpredictable by this council, have formed an alliance that has changed the political landscape of our galaxy. Jake remembered the day the announcement had been made on the Aurora Dawn. Captain Henderson had gathered everyone in the assembly hall to hear the message from the Galactic Council. The news had been both exciting and overwhelming. The human-Catharan alliance was now official. Earth and the Catharan homeworld had signed treaties that covered trade, defense, technology sharing, and cultural exchange. But more than that, they had created a new model for how species could work together. The results speak for themselves, Chancellor Vorth continued. Trade routes that were once dangerous are now secure, protected by joint human-Catharan patrol fleets. Scientific research has advanced faster in 6 months than in the previous decade, and species that had never spoken to each other are now working together on projects that benefit everyone. In the audience, Dr. Grant sat with her Kitharan colleague, Healer Shalin. Together, they had developed medical treatments that worked for 17 different species. Their joint research facility on New Geneva had become the most advanced medical center in known space. Maya Thompson and her engineering partner, Kreshtar, had revolutionized spacecraft design by combining human innovation with Kitharan precision. Their new ships were faster, more efficient, and safer than anything either species had built alone. But perhaps most importantly, the Chancellor said, looking directly at Jake, this alliance has shown us that our assumptions about dangerous or primitive species are often wrong. What we fear in others may actually be their greatest strengths. Commander Zethkar, now wearing the insignia of a Joint Fleet Admiral, stood from his seat among the Kitharan delegation. The humans taught us that strength can include kindness, he said in his deep, rumbling voice. They showed us that protecting others is not weakness, but the highest form of courage. Captain Henderson, now Admiral Henderson in charge of interspecies relations, nodded from his place among the human representatives. The Kitharans taught us that honor and discipline can coexist with flexibility and growth. They showed us that being careful about trust is not paranoia, but wisdom. Piptar shifted on Jake's shoulder and whispered something in his ear. The young Kitharan's English had become perfect over the months, but he still preferred to speak quietly when he was nervous. He wants to know if you are ready for your speech, Jake translated with a smile. The Chancellor gestured toward the speaking platform. Sergeant Morrison, would you please address the Council? Jake walked to the center of the chamber with Piptar still on his shoulder. Looking out at the sea of alien faces, he thought about how much had changed since that day in the hydroponics bay. These beings who had once seemed so different and frightening were now colleagues, friends, and allies. 6 months ago, I was just a Marine doing his job, Jake began. I had no idea that one simple moment would change everything. When Piptar climbed onto my shoulder, I did not think about diplomacy or politics or cultural exchange. I just saw a young person who was curious and friendly, and I responded the way any human would respond to a child. Piptar purred softly, remembering that first meeting. Since then, I have learned that humans and Kitharans have more in common than anyone expected. We both value family and friendship. We both want to protect the people we care about. We both believe that the strong should help the weak. These are not human ideas or Kitharan ideas. They are good ideas that many species share. Jake paused to look around the chamber. In the audience, he could see representatives from species that had been enemies for centuries, sitting together and taking notes. The example set by the Human-Kitharan Alliance was inspiring others to reconsider their own relationships. The most important thing we learned is that first impressions can be wrong. Humans were called reckless and emotional. Kitharans were called aggressive and territorial. But when we took the time to understand each other, we discovered that what others saw as weaknesses were actually our greatest strengths. Piptar stood up on Jake's shoulder and addressed the assembly in his clear, young voice. My people thought humans were too soft to be good allies, but their gentleness is actually their power. They make friends where others make enemies. They find solutions where others find only problems. The chamber was completely silent as the young Kitharan continued. Humans thought my people were too fierce to be trusted. But our strength protects the friendships that humans create. Together we are stronger than either of us could be alone. Jake smiled at his young friend before continuing his speech. Today, the Human-Kitharan Alliance protects trade routes, conducts research, and provides aid to species in need. But more than that, we have proven that peace is possible between any species willing to try. Chancellor Vorth stood again. The Council has voted unanimously to establish the Galactic Cultural Exchange Program, based on the success of the Human-Kitharan model. Over the next year, we will arrange meetings between species that have never interacted before. An excited murmur ran through the chamber. This was exactly what advocates of galactic peace had hoped for. But we must also address a new challenge, the Chancellor continued. Long-range sensors have detected ships from the Void Sector approaching our space. The Sector Empire has been completely isolated for over a century. Our records describe them as hostile and dangerous. Jake felt Piptar's claws tighten slightly on his shoulder. The young Kitharan whispered, They sound scary. Every species we have contact with has warned us about the Sector, the Chancellor said. They are described as ruthless conquerors who show no mercy to other species. Their ships will reach the outer colonies within days. Jake looked out at the assembly and saw fear in many faces. the same fear that had been directed at humans and Catharans not so long ago. But he also saw something else. He saw species that had once been enemies now sitting together, ready to face a common challenge. With respect, Chancellor, Jake said, 6 months ago, this same council was afraid of humans and Catharans meeting. Today we are proof that fear is often based on misunderstanding. Piptar nodded agreement. Maybe the Sectar are not as dangerous as everyone thinks. Maybe they are just different. Admiral Henderson stood from his seat. The joint human-Catharan fleet is ready to meet these newcomers. But instead of sending warships, I propose we send a diplomatic vessel. Let us try to understand them before we assume they are enemies. Commander Zethkar rose as well. The Catharan Empire agrees. We will not repeat the mistakes that others made with us. We will offer the Sectar the same chance at friendship that humans offered us. Chancellor Vorth considered the proposal seriously. And if they are truly hostile? Jake smiled the same warm smile that had won over a nervous Catharan cub 6 months ago. Then we will deal with that when it happens. But I would rather be wrong about peace than right about war. The vote was unanimous. The joint human-Catharan diplomatic mission would meet the Sectar ships with an offer of friendship instead of a show of force. As the assembly broke up and representatives from different species gathered to discuss the new developments, Jake walked through the crowds with Piptar on his shoulder. Many beings stopped to greet them, to ask questions, or simply to touch the hand of the human who had started a revolution with a single act of kindness. "Are you nervous about meeting the Sectar?" Piptar asked as they made their way back to their quarters. Jake scratched gently behind the young Catharan's ears. "A little. But I learned something important 6 months ago. When you approach others with an open heart, amazing things can happen." Piptar purred and settled more comfortably on his favorite perch. "I think the Sectar are going to be very surprised when they meet us." "I think you are right, little friend. I think they are going to be very surprised indeed."